He said that as a child, he thought adults' fears were exaggerated, superstitious, something invented to keep children away from problems no one wanted to explain. His aunt was exactly like that, superstitious, silent, always watching the house as if she heard something no one else could. She repeated the same phrase every time he passed through the hallway at night. Never look in the mirror at midnight. Never. He laughed, made light of it, called it a legend. But his aunt didn't laugh back. She just closed the door slowly, like someone who knows that certain things aren't warnings. They're notices. And he only discovered this on the wrong night, at the wrong time, in the most unforgettable way. It all started on an ordinary day, without any sign that anything was about to change. The house seemed normal, the hallway seemed ordinary, and the mirror, that old mirror, hanging for decades with its dark wooden frame, seemed merely motionless, harmless, worn by time. He didn't understand why his aunt always covered that mirror with a thick cloth at nightfall, as if protecting the object from the world or protecting the world from him. That night, near midnight, he passed through the living room and saw the uncovered mirror for the first time. The cloth was on the floor, folded in a strange way, as if it had fallen or been removed. The house was too quiet, not a breath of wind, no creaking of wood, no sound coming from anywhere. For a second, he felt that strange vibration in the air, the same one we feel when someone is watching us without us realizing it, but he ignored it, because ignoring it seemed easier than accepting it. When the clock struck midnight, he stood before the mirror, holding his cell phone as if it were courage. He laughed to himself, remembering his aunt's warnings. "It's just a mirror," he murmured, approaching the dark surface. But at that moment, his reflection didn't seem to follow his movements precisely. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. At first, he raised his hand, and the reflection raised it too, but with a delay. He blinked, and the reflection blinked afterward. He tilted his head, and the reflection imitated him, but at the wrong angle. Too small to call a mistake, too big to call a coincidence. That's when something changed. The reflection smiled first, not a gentle smile, not a human smile, a smile too thin, too wide, opening slowly, as if stretching its own skin to fit an expression his face would never make. He froze. The reflection continued smiling on its own, and then, very slowly, the reflection turned its face. Not to him, but to something behind him. He felt his heart stop for a second. There was nothing behind him. He knew it. He turned slowly, his breath caught in his throat, but the hallway was empty, cold, still. When he looked back at the mirror, the reflection was closer to the glass, as if it had moved a few centimeters on its own. It was at that moment that the whole house seemed to exhale an icy breath, as if the walls had breathed. He took a step back, but the reflection didn't back down with him. It remained in the same position, motionless, looking at him as if it had finally found the moment it had been waiting for. The reflection's mouth moved slowly, articulating a silent, soundless word. He didn't hear it, but he understood. He understood it in his body. He understood it in his fear. The word was a name, his name, and the reflection pronounced it as if it had waited years to say it. It was at that instant that he heard his aunt's bedroom door open at the end of the hallway. She ran in barefoot, her eyes wide, and screamed his name with a force he had never heard before. She grabbed his arm, pulled him away from the mirror, and covered the surface with the cloth in a single desperate movement. Only then did he realize that his aunt was trembling so much she seemed barely able to breathe. She looked at him with the accumulated terror of decades and said only one thing, her voice broken. "I warned you! After midnight! What's there isn't you?" She led him into the room like someone dragging someone who had just touched fire, without explaining, without answering questions, without allowing him to look back. The door slammed shut, and he stood in the middle of the room, his heart pounding so fast it felt like it filled his chest. His aunt locked the door, then pushed a heavy dresser against it, as if trying to stop someone, or something, from entering. Only then did he realize she was crying, not a cry of immediate fear, but an old, accumulated cry, as if the scene that had just happened was merely a repetition of something she had feared since her youth. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His mind was still trapped in that impossible image, the smiling reflection before him, calling his name with lips that weren't his. His aunt knelt before him, holding his face in both hands, as if to assure him he was still the same. She repeated, look at me," and only then did he notice that she wasn't looking directly into his eyes. She observed reflections, the glint of his gaze in her pupils, the shadow of the curtain on the floor, the light from the lamp on the wall. Anything that wasn't a reflective surface. When she finally managed to speak, he asked what had happened, why she had pulled him like that, why the mirror seemed alive. His aunt took a deep breath, leaned back on the bed, and said the phrase he never forgot. "It's not the mirror that's dangerous, it's what's on the other side." He tried to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come out. His aunt continued, her voice low, as if she were telling a secret carried for too many years. She said that mirror hadn't originally belonged to the house, that it wasn't part of the family, that it had been brought by her grandmother when she was young, after having lived in another city that no one in the family mentioned, and that, since then, no one had managed to get rid of it. The mirror kept coming back. It always came back. Once it was left in the attic, and months later it reappeared hanging in the living room with the nails intact, as if it had never been removed. Once again, it was wrapped up and taken to a cousin's basement, who swore he'd burned the object. But weeks later his aunt woke up to find the mirror back on the wall, covered only in dust. The whole family knew. That glass didn't stay where you wanted it. It stayed where it wanted to be. She explained that there was a reason for covering the mirror every night. It wasn't superstition, it was protection. After midnight, she said, whatever lives in the reflection gains permission to look back. And when it looks, it can imitate, it can study, it can learn your face, and if you give it enough time. Her voice faltered. She took a deep breath before continuing. It tries to get out. He felt a shiver so deep it seemed to run up his spine. He remembered the delayed smile, the reflection turning its face to something behind him, the mouth pronouncing his name without making a sound. That wasn't an illusion. That wasn't a glitch. It was the entity in the mirror trying to make contact. The aunt recounted that this had happened before, that when she was young, she herself had made the mistake of looking in the mirror after midnight. She saw the reflection smile crookedly, saw its head tilt to the opposite side, saw its mouth move, and saw, for a fraction of a second, the reflection raise its hand on its own, without her having raised hers. From that day on, the grandmother had all the mirrors in the house covered at night, but the most disturbing explanation came last. The aunt confessed that the mirror didn't just show who you were, it showed who you would be if you let that entity take over. That was why the reflection imitated with a delay. It wasn't you, it was learning you, capturing details, adjusting the smile, molding the expression, preparing for the moment when it could replace the original. When he asked why it happened on that particular night, the aunt replied with terrified calm, "Because today you reach the age when it starts calling." He didn't sleep that night. His aunt didn't either. They sat far from the mirror, listening to small sounds around the house, cracks on the wall, footsteps that weren't theirs, and at a certain moment, the clear sound of something touching the cloth, covering the glass, like fingers slowly sliding over thick fabric. Each time the sound arose, his aunt whispered some ancient prayer, as if she were fighting the darkness. And he realized that, however much he tried to deny it, the entity in the reflection was alive enough to act, alive enough to imitate, alive enough to call. The following night, he tried to act as if everything was all right. He tried to have dinner normally, tried to watch television, tried not to look at the hallway where the mirror was hidden behind the thick cloth. But the house seemed different now. The air was denser, as if it carried invisible dust, the lighting more yellowish than usual, as if the light bulbs were being drained little by little. With each step he took, he felt the floor respond with a deeper creak, as if someone or something was following him with a delay. His aunt avoided any reflective surface. She turned off her cell phone when the screen went dark. She even covered the metal doorknob. She knew, she felt it, and that terrified him even more, because it wasn't hysteria. It was experience, it was memory, it was survival. Dawn arrived like a cold wave. He remained lying in the living room, his back to the hallway, listening to his aunt murmuring low prayers inside her room. But the silence of that house was more powerful than any protection. At 11:59 p.m., the air became so cold it felt like winter inside the walls. At midnight sharp, the sound came, not loud, not dramatic, but clear as a fingernail snapping fabric. A slow, heavy, irregular sliding. He knew immediately what it was, the cloth, the thick cloth that covered the mirror, the cloth that should never be touched, the cloth that night, was falling on its own. He didn't want to turn around, he didn't want to look, but the whole house seemed to push him, as if the air were pulling his attention toward the hallway, and even without moving his body, his peripheral vision caught the movement. The dark cloth sliding across the floor, as if pulled by invisible fingers. The hallway was completely exposed, the mirror too, the old frame, the black surface, the minimal glimmer of light, and something more, much more. He felt, before seeing, that the reflection wasn't standing still, waiting. It was active, it was conscious, it was prepared. When he finally turned his face, just enough to see part of the frame, his whole body froze. In the reflection, there was movement. Not fast, not aggressive, but calculated. The reflection was standing, even though he was lying down. There was no logic in the gesture. The reflection simply no longer corresponded to the position of his real body. The silhouette in the mirror leaned forward, as if observing the room for him, its shoulders stretching beyond human proportion, its neck lengthening as if made of something too flexible to be flesh. He tried to close his eyes, but it was too late. That thing turned its head slowly, very slowly, until it looked directly at him. The smile that appeared was impossible, too wide, too thin. The mouth moved as if testing muscles that should never exist, and then came the worst. The reflection's mouth opened, and there were no teeth. There was space, a deep, dark, empty space, as if that face were just a poorly fitting mask. The reflection's skin trembled for an instant, as if something underneath was trying to push, to get out, to reveal itself. His body reacted immediately. Cold sweat, involuntary trembling, caught breath. The room seemed smaller, the walls closer, the air weaker. It was then that the reflection raised its hand before him. The hand rose slowly, with an almost inviting gesture, almost asking or ordering. The surface of the mirror rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. It was no longer glass. It was a living, pulsating membrane, breathing along with the entity on the other side. He felt his aunt's voice before he heard the words. The door to her room opened violently. She ran barefoot, shouting his name, but the hallway seemed longer than usual. Each of her steps seemed trapped in a slower time, as if the house didn't want her to arrive on time. While she struggled against the dense air, the reflection made its first clear movement. It approached the glass, pressing its hands against the distorted surface as if trying to pass through it. The reflection's skin vibrated as if filled with voices trying to escape at once. And, in a single impossible second, he heard, not with his ears, but within his mind, a phrase, formed by several broken voices. "You saw me. Now I can come." He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. The reflection was almost out. The mother, the grandmother, the aunt, all the forbidden stories now made sense. It didn't just want to be seen. It wanted to be a substitute. The aunt finally reached him and pulled him with a force he hadn't imagined she possessed. She threw him to the living room floor and ran to the mirror. She didn't try to cover it with the cloth. It was too late. She simply turned the mirror brutally, slamming the frame against the wall to flip the reflective surface downwards. The sound was deafening, a dull thud followed by absolute silence. The house became still. Neither the reflection, nor the glass, nor the air moved anymore. He lay on the floor, gasping, trembling, while his aunt, her voice shattered by fear, said, "If you had said one word, just one, he would have returned to his place. If you wish, I can continue to the final part, revealing what happened the next day, the fate of the mirror, the truth about the entity's origin, and whether it really stayed outside, or if it came with the reflection." He said he doesn't remember falling asleep that night. His body simply shut down on its own, as if it had been switched off after a shock too profound to sustain consciousness. When he opened his eyes again, the sun was already illuminating the room, but the light seemed weak, timid, as if avoiding touching certain corners of the house. His aunt was sitting in the armchair, her back to him, holding a rosary so tightly that her fingers were marked. The mirror remained turned towards the wall, its reflective surface hidden, the old frame tilted at an odd angle, as if struggling not to topple over. The first thing he noticed was the silence, a silence so absolute that it felt as if the whole house was holding its breath, awaiting the next move. His aunt stood up slowly and walked towards him. She looked years older than the night before. Deep, dark circles under her eyes, pale skin, the tired gaze of someone who had spent the night fighting against something that shouldn't exist.
It always came back.
She didn't say good morning. She didn't ask how he was. The first thing she did was cup his face in her hands and observe his eyes.
Once again,
a slow, desperate examination, as if she were checking if what was before her was still him and not a reflection.
Covered only in dust.
"Talk to me,"
the whole family
she said. He
that
spoke.
glass didn't stay
His
where
voice
you wanted
came out trembling,
it stayed
weak,
where it wanted to be.
but it was
She
his.
explained that there was a reason for
The
covering the
aunt
mirror every night.
released a
It wasn't
breath of
superstition.
relief, a heavy,
It was protection.
painful relief,
After midnight,
as if it
she
had
said,
been held for
whatever
too
lives
long.
in the reflection gains
She
permission to
bent
look
down
back.
near the
And when
mirror
it looks,
and touched the frame
it can
carefully,
imitate.
as one
It can
touches something
study.
poisonous.
It can learn your face.
He tried
and
to get out.
if you give it
she
enough time,
murmured. He
her
really
voice
tried.
faltered. She took a deep
That's
breath
when he
before
saw the
continuing.
bottom of
It
the
tries to get
frame was
out.
burned.
He
Not a
felt a
burn
shiver
from
so deep
fire,
it seemed to run
but
up his
something
spine.
like
He remembered the
superheated
delayed
metal
smile.
that left the
The
wood
reflection turning
wavy,
its face to
dark,
something behind
marked,
him. The mouth pronouncing
as if
his
the
name
mirror
without
had
making a
become
sound.
too hot,
That
as if
wasn't an
something on the
illusion.
other side
That
was
wasn't
pushing with
a
such
glitch.
force
It was the
that
entity
the
in the mirror
object
trying to
itself
make
almost
contact.
gave way.
The aunt
Explained
happened
what she
before,
had never
that
dared to say
when
before,
she was young,
that mirror
she
was
herself
not just
had
an
made the
ancient
mistake of looking
artifact.
in the mirror after
It was an
midnight. She
imperfect
saw the
portal,
reflection
a
smile
point of
quickly.
contact
So its
between
head tilted to the
realities,
opposite side.
but not
So its
between
mouth moved.
worlds,
And so,
between
for a fraction of a
consciousnesses.
second, the
What
reflection
lived on
raised
the
its
other
hand on
side
its
was
own,
not human,
without
but
her having
understood
raised
humans
hers.
enough
From
to
that
want to
day on,
imitate them.
the grandmother
He
had all
molded
the mirrors
himself
in the
from
house covered at
reflections.
night.
He observed
But the most
faces.
disturbing
He
explanation
studied
came
movements.
last.
He
The aunt
learned
confessed
expressions.
that the mirror didn't just
If you
show
looked
who
long
you
enough,
It
The
showed who you would
reflection
be if you let that
would
entity
begin
take
to
over.
adjust to
That
your
was why the
body
reflection
until it was
imitated with a
almost
delay.
perfect.
It wasn't you.
Almost you.
It was learning you.
That's what happened to his
Capturing
grandmother.
details,
That's what
adjusting the
almost
smile,
happened to his aunt.
molding the
That's what
expression,
tried to
preparing
happen
for
to
the
him.
moment when it could replace
He
the
asked
original.
what would
When he
happen
asked why it
if the
happened on that
reflection
particular
managed
night,
to escape.
the aunt replied with
His
terrified
aunt closed
calm.
her eyes before
Because
answering.
today you reach
It
the
would
age when
take
it
your
starts
place.
calling.
The
He didn't
real
sleep
one
that
would
night.
be trapped on the
His
other
aunt
side.
didn't either. They sat far from
The
the mirror,
sentence
listening
fell on
to
him
small
like
sounds
ice
around them,
breaking
house
on his
cracks on the
skin.
wall, footsteps
He
that
would
weren't
be
theirs.
trapped.
And at a certain
He,
moment, the clear
trapped
sound of
on the
something touching
surface
the
of the
cloth
mirror,
covering, the
conscious,
glass-like fingers
looking at the
slowly
world
sliding
without
over
being
thick
able to
fabric.
interfere,
Each time the
while
sound
the entity
arose,
lived in
his
his
aunt
body,
whispered some
in
ancient
his
prayer,
place,
as if she
using
were
his
fighting the
name,
darkness.
walking
And he
around the
realized
house
that,
as if it had
however
always
much he tried to
existed
deny
there.
it, the entity
His
in the
aunt said
reflection
that's
was
what
alive enough
almost
to
happened
act,
to a great aunt in the
alive enough to
family
imitate,
decades
alive
ago.
enough to call.
She looked at the mirror for
following
too
night,
long,
he tried
and
to
since
act as if
then
everything
never
was all
spoke
right.
again.
He tried to have
She
dinner
spent
normally,
hours in front
tried
of the
to watch
glass,
television,
motionless,
tried not to look
as
at the
if she were
hallway where the
talking to
mirror was
someone
hidden
no
behind
one
the
could
thick
see.
cloth.
One
But the
day,
house seemed
they
different
found
now.
her
The air
lying on
was
the
denser,
floor,
as if it carried
alive,
invisible dust,
but not
the lighting more
recognizing
yellowish than
anyone.
usual, as if
And
the
in
light
the
bulbs were being
reflection,
drained little by little.
her
With
shadow
each step
seemed
he
to
took,
smile.
he felt the floor respond
From
with a
that
deeper
point
creak,
on,
as
he
if
knew
someone
the
or
mirror
something was
couldn't stay
following him
there.
with a delay. His aunt
They tried to
avoided any
protect it
reflective
from the
surface.
light, but
She
the
turned off
wood
her cell
heated
phone
up
when the
when the
screen
sun
went dark.
touched it.
She even covered the
They
metal
tried to
doorknob.
hide it, but
She
the
knew.
object
She felt
reappeared in
it,
the room.
and that terrified him
It was
even more,
impossible to
because it
destroy
wasn't
it.
hysteria.
His
It was
aunt had already
experience.
tried
It
before,
was memory.
with a hammer,
It was
with fire,
survival. Dawn
with
arrived
holy water.
like a cold wave.
Nothing
He remained
worked.
lying in the living room,
The only thing they
his
could
back
do
to the hallway,
was trap
listening
it,
to his aunt murmuring
prevent
low
the
prayers inside her
reflection
room.
from having
But the silence of that
space
house
to
was more
move,
powerful
to
than any
grow,
protection.
to
At
call out.
11:59 p.m.,
They wrapped the mirror
the air
in
became
3
so
layers
cold
of
it felt
thick
like
fabric,
winter inside the
tied
walls.
it with
At
ropes,
midnight sharp,
placed it
the
inside a
sound
metal
came out
box,
loud,
and
not
buried it in the
dramatic,
yard
but clear as a
under an
fingernail
old
snapping
tree.
fabric. A
But
slow,
that night,
heavy,
when he went to the
irregular
bathroom at
sliding.
2 in the morning,
He knew
he
immediately
felt a
what it
presence in the hallway,
The cloth,
and he
the
saw
thick
for a
cloth that
moment a
covered the
bright
mirror.
spot on the
cloth
floor,
that should never be
like a
touched.
glint of glass
The
trying to
cloth that,
pierce the
that
darkness.
night, was
The
falling
metal
on its
box
own. He
vibrated
didn't want
beneath
to
the
turn
earth.
around. He
The
didn't want
reflection
to
was calling,
look,
even
but
buried,
the whole house
even
seemed to push
wrapped
him,
up,
as
even
if the air were
imprisoned.
pulling his attention
It was then
toward
that
the
he
hallway.
realized
And even without
the
moving
mirror
his body,
didn't want to
his
stay in
peripheral
the
vision
real
caught the
world.
movement.
It wanted
The dark
contact.
cloth
It
sliding
wanted to be
across the floor,
seen.
as
It
if
wanted to
pulled
be
by
remembered.
invisible
It
fingers.
wanted to
The
continue the
hallway
work
was completely
interrupted in the
exposed.
previous generation.
His voice came out trembling.
And then came the final
Weak,
question,
but it was
the
his.
one he's
The aunt
afraid to
released
answer
a
to
breath
this
of
day.
relief. A heavy,
If the mirror
painful
is
relief,
buried,
as if it had
why
been
does
held
it
for
still
too long.
feel
She
someone
bent
looking
down
at
near
it
the
when
mirror
it walks down
and
the
touched
hallway
the
at
frame
night?
carefully, as
Why
one
does it
touches
hear
something
faint
poisonous.
scratches on
He
the
tried
wall?
to get out.
Why
She murmured.
sometimes on
He really
screens
tried.
that are turned
That's
off,
when he
on
saw
dark windows,
the
on
bottom of
chrome
the frame was
faucets?
burned.
Does
Not
it
a
see
burn
a
from
piece of
fire,
its own
but
face
something like
smiling on its
superheated
own?
metal that left the wood
Comment
wavy,
below.
dark,
Have you ever
marked,
seen your
as if the
reflection
mirror had
do
become
something
too
you
hot,
didn't do?
as if something on the
Share
other side
your
was pushing with
experience.
such force that
I
the
want to
object
know if this
itself
only
almost
happens
gave
to
way.
those
The
who've
aunt
been
explained what
called,
she had never
or if
dared
you've
to say
also
before.
seen
That
something from the
Miata
other
was not just
side.
an ancient